there are so many embassies, so many countries vying for 2 minutes of attention by the decision makers. So how do you distinguish yourself from the crowd? If social media are a means to do it, as long as it remains nice and decent and even sometimes funny, why not? So we did a video and suddenly it was going in the hundreds of thousands. And there were a few other instances, and then there was the Instagram thing on We Are the Embassy of Switzerland, which I never thought would reach the 3.4 million that we reached. I mean, if Kim Kardashian needs some advice, paying advice from me, she can call me.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I'm so thrilled to introduce today's guest, the Honorable Jacques Pitteloud, the Ambassador of Switzerland to the United States. He's served in this role since his appointment in 2019. He's very accomplished. I could spend the whole show reading a bio, but what I want to do is tell you 3 things that I think you should know about Ambassador Pitteloud. Number 1, he started his career in the Foreign Service in 1987, and he has served around the world, starting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and later as ambassador to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia, and the Seychelles. Number 2, Ambassador Pitteloud he's also served in senior roles in his home country, including as the first intelligence coordinator for the Swiss government and as Director General of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, where he oversaw a budget of $3 billion and a staff of more than 5,000 people. And number 3, beyond being a renowned diplomat, he's also a lauded bird photographer. His photo of a rare painted bunting in Maryland, it was featured in the Washington Post, and his pictures have been published in several books and publications in Kenya and in South Africa, not to mention his Facebook page, which has some wonderful bird photos on there. Ambassador Pitteloud, so you've been called many things, from doctor, you have a PhD, to polyglot, you speak at least 5 languages, from your excellency to an Instagram and YouTube star, which we will talk about a bit more. Today, we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I was thinking I've never been called His Holiness, but maybe that's for another life.
Well, you know, you never know what other responsibilities you may have in the future, so that may happen.
Indeed.
Now, your tour of duty in the U.S. is unfortunately coming to an end. Many people are sad about that. I understand your next stop is Brussels, where you're going to serve as ambassador of Switzerland to NATO. And I just want to ask, what do you hope Americans learned about Switzerland during your time here?
What I hope that Americans learn about Switzerland, and that is what we have been really busy trying to convey as a message, is that there is a Switzerland beyond Heidi, cheese, chocolate, and watches, and banks. In fact, it is an easy task, and it's probably the most beautiful job in the world to be representing Switzerland in the US, because there is generally a positive prejudice here in this country. Everyone loves us, quite often without knowing exactly why. So everyone has a positive image of Switzerland, and not everyone confuses Switzerland with Sweden. But generally, it's people have this positive image without knowing really who we are. And the reality is, we are one of the leading technological nations. We are the 20th biggest economy in the world. We are the 7th biggest investor in the American economy. And in research and development, we are the 3rd investor, the third biggest investor in the American economy, meaning we are part and parcel of America's economic and scientific future. There is not a single state where in the US where Switzerland is not present in science, in the economy, creating jobs like between 500,000 and 750,000 jobs created by Swiss companies in the US. And by the way, the other way around. And our two nations are the vivid example of how free trade works, because free trade and globalization works when it is between economies that have the same development level and the same technological level. No one is stealing jobs from the other one. We are actually creating jobs in the US, and the US is creating jobs in Switzerland. A lot of them, by the way, a lot of them. And so it makes for a mutually beneficial relationship. Now we are living in a time where everyone is criticizing globalization, and partly, rightly so, for having exported the dirty jobs to poorer countries and then have destroyed industrialization in the countries that were exporting the jobs. Our relationship is different. So now it is, I think, no time to go back to protectionism and to isolationism. The time is to rethink the way we go about globalization. And the Swiss-American relationship is the best example of how you can make it work. It's beneficial for both. That's the image I want to convey.
Well, it sounds like there's so many good stories that you're able to tell, and we'll get into that in a little bit, because at Chief Influencer, what we want to talk about is how leaders influence others, how that has changed. And, I had to ask you to start. I mean, I know you speak several languages. How does this idea of influence change when you're switching from German or Swiss German to French or English? Does it make a difference?
It does make a huge difference. The language is the expression of the soul, and it's the expression of culture. And you will never communicate in Japan like you would in the US. The US is the land of amazing, of bragging, of even when you have not much to say, then you have to say it in a rhetorically impeccable manner, because this is the way it's done in the US. Whereas in Switzerland, for instance, you will always tend to be humble, and to, even with your most incredible achievements, you will go like I think we didn't do too badly. So you have to adapt your communication style to the country you're in. So I did not communicate in Rwanda, where I was ambassador to Rwanda. Rwanda is a country where you never say things very openly. It's always a way to go around the topic. I didn't communicate in Rwanda the way I'm communicating in the US. And the reason why Marcellus, my chief communication officer, and I have been working in a very American way is because in the end, my audience here is an American audience. I'm not speaking to this, which from time to time gets me in trouble back home, because they go like, he's not communicating like a Swiss. Of course I'm not. I'm not speaking to the Swiss. I'm speaking to the Americans. And wherever you go, you have to adapt. And speaking the language makes a huge difference, because very soon you and I will be able to buy these little small apps, and we'll be able to speak with anyone from Papua New Guinea to Kazakhstan, and the app will translate. But it's not translating the culture and the soul. It's just translating what was said. So wherever I go, I try to learn the language, because it will help me understand much more in depth what are the people I'm talking to.
And I think that's so important that you bring up the language, but also the cultural context around the language, and what's really appropriate in one setting may be seen as very inappropriate in another setting. And that's been overly complicated probably by the fact that what your colleagues in Switzerland, they can see what you're saying in the United States because information travels so quickly. They don't have to wait for a diplomatic cable because they can see you live streamed and they can look at, social media. And I wanted to ask, what do you think social media, and especially Twitter, has that changed diplomacy?
Fundamentally, It has changed diplomacy fundamentally because we used to be the keepers of secrets. We used to be the keepers of knowledge. We used to be the people who had time because before you were writing a cable, you would phone once a week because it was so expensive. You would read your whole newspapers a week later because it would come like, back in the days in the Pacific when the boat would finally come once a year. You would have a flight once a week bringing the newspapers from back home. And now everything has to be immediate. And we used to have time to digest an information, put it into a context, write a report, and then inform our capital on what was happening. Nowadays, everyone expects an instant reaction. And we have to make it clear to our masters that it's not about us divulging the latest information 10 seconds after it happened, because the media, the social media, and the internet will already have done it.
Yeah.
My role is to deliver an interpretation that will be useful for my government if it takes 2 days. But if it takes 2 days, but then my government will be able to understand what it means, and not just the raw information. There was an assassination attempt on the candidate a few days ago. They don't need me to know that. They will know it probably at the same time I'm informed.
Yeah.
But what does it mean for the future of the US? Sometimes it is difficult because the principles get used to get instant information, and you have to make them understand that what they need is an analysis, not an information. It's what are the consequences. You take the raw information, you assess the source, you assess the credibility of the source, the credibility of the information itself, and then you put it into a context, and then you analyze what the consequences are for us, for my company, for my country, and doing this work of interpretation requires time, of course. It requires also a lot of work, a lot of accumulated knowledge. To give you an example, I mean, the moment I arrived in the United States, I started, and I had been doing a lot of reading on American history, but I've never stopped reading between 3 to 5 books a week on American history, on American politics, on American economy, because you need to be as deep as possible within. You will never be, if you're not an American, you'll never be an American. As little as you can be Swiss, even if you were to be. There is something that is, it's years and years and years of experience, but at least trying to understand. And it's particularly difficult where you're dealing with the United States of America in Europe, because Europeans tend to think of Americans as being Europeans on another continent. And they do not understand how profoundly, fundamentally different the two continents are. And they tend to forget that Americans, or back then, the Pilgrim Fathers and whatever, left Europe to build something that was to be fundamentally different. And so when you're reporting from China or from Burundi to Europe, people will not struggle to understand that this is a different society. But if you report from America, everyone thinks they know America because they've watched Dallas back then, or Desperate Housewives, or whatever, and because they've all been on holidays to the Grand Canyon, to Los Angeles, and to New York, and thus they know America because they've spent a few weeks and they understand the language, or so they think. And so making people understand that this is a continent that is totally different from Europe, and that you have to shed your European lens before you start analyzing what's happening. This is one of the challenges that every European diplomat that has been to America has had to contend with.
One of the things you said was, you mentioned the credibility of information. And obviously right now we have this rising challenge of misinformation and disinformation, and how that affects, companies, but also elections. It occurs to me that this topic must really hit home with you, because you headed the Swiss delegation to the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And, that's a topic that there is a lot of misinformation about. How do you think governments can overcome lies being spread on social media in this time? Because it travels so quickly and it can proliferate so much.
That's the topic of a meeting we had 2 weeks ago with the founder of Politico and a group of top American journalists at my residence, and the topic was how do we deal with it? And the clear answer is we don't have the answer yet, because we will always be torn between what I would call the French solution, which is regulating. But how do you regulate the access to information, or leaving it totally free, like Elon Musk said 2 weeks ago, when he said, finally, we've reached a point where everyone will have access to unfettered information, unfiltered information. This is a big victory for democracy. I don't believe it is. I believe that what is happening right now in the social media is a commotion, a revolution that is comparable to what happened in the 15th century with the advent of the printing press. There was a sudden massive increase in the speed of the circulation of information, and it took 2 centuries for the powers that be to understand how to deal with it. Only the advent of the printing press was a picnic compared to what's happening now with the social media. I personally, I am coming to the conclusion, though it's not yet a conclusion, that we can only do it through education. Educating the new generation to understand what it means, or what a raw information, what an information means, and educate them to always try and put it into context. Remember, the generation that's now 20, 25, how the young, especially the young girls, were susceptible to fall for predators on the internet because it was new, and how the new generation, the younger ones, have now been educated to understand, hey, be careful. The great looking 16 years old that's trying to hit on you on the internet might be a 60 years old predator. And now they know how to do it. We need to re-educate the whole generation to assess information, and not to take for granted every. And I mean, the assassination attempt against the candidate Donald Trump the other day was such a good example. It didn't take more than 10 minutes for the first fake news to start to circulate, from the fake picture of Secret Service agents laughing whilst evacuating the president. And thus, you see, they were laughing, and they were happy about it was a conspiracy, and it was a fake picture, to all the analysis by experts, and it turns out many of these experts never existed. We have to educate the young generation to wait, not to take every immediate information as God's word, because I personally don't believe in how do you regulate free speech?
Right.
How do you regulate free speech? How do you do this? Or do you put a sign, this information has been checked by trained journalists? Probably we'll have to do that too. We'll have to do it. But you will hear, as soon as we start doing this, it will mean, aha, this is the information that has been controlled by them.
Yes. Yeah.
By them. By all the different conspiracies, from the Martians to George Soros to the people trying to implant chips into our shoulders and all these things. I think it's an educational matter. What's your opinion about this? Well, how do you see it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right on education, and I'll tell you an example. Obviously, AI is a new factor when it comes to this, because you can, quickly generate something that is convincing and that looks real. And so one of the things that's happened over the last year, I had a chance to talk to the person who led the AI task force at the White House recently, and they've been working with private companies to add watermarks so that it would say, this photo has been altered or created by AI. Well, the problem, I think, with that is that, we use lots of AI features to, what if I'm removing somebody's name badge, or what if I'm just, cleaning up the lighting? Is it also going to say that AI feature that I used? And then will everything have AI on it? And the example that we discussed was, if I go to the state of California, they have a specific law that they have to disclose if there are potential carcinogens in food. Well, you go into any Starbucks and it says this coffee might have potential. You go to any restaurant, it has the signs everywhere. So because it's everywhere, it sort of means nothing, right? Because everybody sees it on everything. And if everything just has a thing that says AI was used to alter this photo, it's not going to really help solve the root of the problem.
And
So I
this
think,
is it's a fundamental question, because it's the question of officially sanctioned information.
yeah,
And it used to be different. It used to be we would have left-wing journalists, right-wing journalists, centrist journalists, but they were journalists. They were
right.
trained to do that job. They were trained, and they had a journalistic ethics to look at an information and try at least to do, even if they had a political opinion, but at least to try and understand, is this credible, and what's the source, and whatever. The moment you say there would be some bureaucrat deciding that this one has been certified as a serious information and this one hasn't, is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. We are creating a world of officially sanctioned information.
Yeah.
Very dangerous. So probably it's a matter, and we need at some point to recreate the job of the journalist. So because the business model is dying, the business model of traditional journalism is gone. One has to face it, because there is no money going into traditional journalism anymore. So, except of course for the elites, and so the few newspapers, the few television channels that will survive the onslaught, because that's what, or the bloodbath that's happening in the media. But we have to recreate for the social media something like the job of a journalist, with the same ethics and the same approach to information. How do we do it? I wish I would know, because I would be a billionaire very soon. I would create the next, I remember when CNN came back in during the first Gulf War as the first 24 hours information channel, and how suddenly it was the model, and everyone tried to emulate it. And now it seems so old-fashioned.
Right.
So old-fashioned. We need a new revolution in the media, and a revolution in the social media, but it has to be based on the ethics and the methods of journalism.
Yeah.
Because this country created modern journalism.
Yeah.
The US created modern journalism. This country created the best journalism schools in the world, together with the Brits, to be fair. And now, how do you adapt this model and make it viable? Because it has to be commercially viable. If it's not commercially viable, it's not going to happen.
Right. Well, on the topic of, journalism and the crisis, there are some bright spots. It's still a very bad picture overall, but some nonprofit journalism organizations at the local level, there's some models that seem to be taking hold. And there's some newer journalistic organizations that are trying to create content in a new way. So I am hopeful. I see some bright spots, but I think you're absolutely right. It's definitely a crisis right now, and we need to have some major changes there.
You with nonprofit, huh?
I've seen, like, for example, there's local newspapers. I'm involved with the Fauquier Times in Fauquier County, Virginia. It's a nonprofit newspaper model. And, you have to raise money from local individuals, but they're producing great journalism. They're getting, awards from the state. And there are some foundations that are really supporting nonprofit journalism. And they're saying, look, we need to look at it similar to the arts. The ballet can't survive without donors. And that's how we need to treat media organizations. So we'll see if that plays out.
Yeah.
But it seems like that is working in some communities.
But the local ballet doesn't have to compete with the Moscow official Russian ballet.
Exactly.
So if you want to have it at the national level, and it will need to be commercially viable, because the other side, the side that is propagating this information every day by the thousands of communications every day, these guys have no limits, because they're being financed by evil actors. And so we need to find a way. I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Yet.
Well, this is a big topic. I'd like to, on the topic of social media, I'd like to switch to something a little lighter, which is you have personally embraced social media, Instagram and YouTube, for example. You had a viral moment with the "We Are the Embassy of Switzerland" post, and you've also had a fun rivalry with another country, Sweden, that has occasionally been mixed up with Switzerland.
They started it.
So, okay, tell us about that. People who don't know, I want them to go online, and we'll include the links, but can you just talk a little bit about those things and why those matter? Because I don't know if you thought in your career that you were going to be making videos for YouTube and Instagram and doing that kind of stuff. Did you?
Well, when I started my career, there was no such thing like Instagram, but yeah, I mean, the Swedish tourism office made a very funny video. It was a very good video saying, we are not Switzerland. Don't confuse us with Switzerland. Come to Sweden. It's much better. And they were taking all the things that they thought were better in Sweden. And of course, very promptly, we got this ukaz, this order from Bern that, if you want to do a video responding to the Swedes, you should ask us, and you should, which of course I didn't. And because otherwise it would have been totally bland and totally boring.
Yeah.
And then I decided that I would do my own video, and we tried to be funny without being offensive. Frankly, I mean, the Swedes. First of all, Sweden is a great country. The Swedes are great friends, and it was more like a light-hearted
Yeah.
banter. And suddenly it went viral. Why did it? I don't know. I'm very glad it did go viral, because what's the job of an ambassador in a city like Washington? There are so many embassies, so many countries vying for 2 minutes of attention by the decision makers. So how do you distinguish yourself from the crowd? If social media are a means to do it, as long as it remains, you know, nice and decent and even sometimes funny, why not? Why not? So we did a video, and suddenly it was going in the hundreds of thousands. And there were a few other instances, and then there was the Instagram thing on We Are the Embassy of Switzerland, which I never thought would reach the 3.4 million that we reached. I mean, if Kim Kardashian needs some advice, paying advice from me, she can call me. No, I think she gets maybe more than 3.4 millions from time to time. Anyway, it was an incredible experience, and in the end, again, it was a positive image. It wasn't. It was not harmful. It was not attacking anyone, and it was giving a little bit of a different image of Switzerland, because don't tell anyone, but our reputation is that we are usually fairly boring.
Okay,
But
so
don't tell anyone, please.
we won't tell anyone about that.
Okay.
We're focused on the good stuff. But
Yeah.
I have to ask you about this, okay? And you can maybe talk about this, because now you're leaving, and so you don't have to worry about the competition here in Washington, as much. You say, well, why not do this? But look, there are a lot of ambassadors, government officials, corporate leaders, industry leaders who just don't feel comfortable doing something that kind of has a fun edge to it the way that you did. They're just too risk averse. And what advice would you give them as someone who said, hey, I was willing to work with my team and take a step to do something that, might be a little bit fun and a little bit different than the formal talks that you would give. And it paid off for you. You're reaching millions of people with that Instagram video. What advice would you give for the leaders who just are a little cautious and they haven't stepped that direction yet?
So my advice, of course, would be first of all, to be funny is always a good way to communicate. So of course you have to have a team who prepares jokes that are not too flat, because if they are, then of course it falls. And try always to communicating in a positive manner. It's never being funny at the expense of someone. Self-deprecating jokes always work very well. Uh, uh, General jokes work very well. Never enter into something that could be controversial. And I'm not speaking about being risk averse. Because the moment you go on the social media, there will be someone who will criticize, and out of the 3.4 million, I think I had 2 remarks that were negative. But it's going to happen. But you should not enter into territory where you will either hurt someone or that's definitely. Of course, one of the 2 negative reactions was my 19-year-old's daughter, like, Daddy, these things are for young people. So you shouldn't do these things. And I said, yeah, I know, but I was forced to do it. My communication team forced me to do it. So here we are. That definitely be my advice. And don't be afraid of communicating offensively, meaning offensively, meaning, hey, these are the good things we do. We are not just about cheese. We are not just about, there is a lot more than Switzerland does, including in this country. And if you can do it in a, you know, humorous manner, why not?
Right.
Maybe, and then everything we do on the social media is not just for fun. We are trying to steer the people towards the website we have created, which is called Swiss Impact. And on Swiss Impact, we tell then the stories. We tell the stories of the Swiss economy, Swiss science, the Swiss contribution to American history. We try also to make the website more fun than the average website of governments, which normally you look at them every now and then, and then you just want to shoot yourself because it's so boring. We are really hoping also to draw, and it worked very well. You know that every one of these videos brought us thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, tens of thousands, actually, tens of
Yeah.
thousands. And this was really a side effect. So it has to be part of a concept. If you're just being funny for the sake of being funny, and it's fun to speak, it's okay. But it has to be part of something much broader, which
Yeah.
is housing the White House Correspondents' Dinners After Party, which is organizing one of the, if not the best party in Washington, D.C., the Soirée Suisse, where, we have thousands of people, literally thousands of decision makers coming, where we can showcase what Switzerland is doing. Then it's the Swiss cinema thing we do online, and it's a whole concept of speaking positively about a great bilateral relationship that we have with the US. And then it gets a little bit more serious than just having fun.
Yes, it ladders up to these goals, but having fun, humor, it works on these platforms. And I love that you brought it back to driving traffic to Swiss Impact. I want to ask you, you talked about humor a little bit. Today, it's kind of hard to keep your personal brand and your professional brand completely separate the way that people used to, because of course, information, blends, and we use social media channels. I just wonder, how do you manage that as, a top diplomat with the personal brand and the professional brand?
The story of me photographing the painted bunting a few years ago and thus making it to the pages of, page 34 or 40 of the Washington Post, definitely helped brand me as the bird watcher, the bird photographer diplomat, which is, it's a nice image. It doesn't hurt anyone. Everyone loves birds. Everyone loves nature. And it gave me this specific image that, of course, I kept cultivating because it helps. It was my brand in Washington, D.C. It's the bird diplomat. It's part of my private life. It's part of my private passions. It allows me to keep the rest of my private life, out. Though so there is someone in my private life that is my spouse, Angelique, who played such a fundamental role in creating the aura that we might have been able to create around the residence, because she's an incredible host, because she meets so many people, because she's so interesting. So usually when people meet her, they forget about me, and it's teamwork. But so you on one hand, I have this birding ambassador image. On the other hand, the kind of claimer couple, at least she's claimer, and interesting and fascinating, and she comes from a different culture. It really helps. It really helps. And then you keep the rest of your private life for yourself, because you have to, and it's better to keep a secret garden, or secret garden. It's not really secret, but not to give everything away.
One of the things we've seen with chief influencers that are successful is they figure out their own comfort zone, but they do, allow that authenticity to come out in their personal life, and doing that through their family, doing that through a hobby. It's very effective. And I think that, what you just reflected there, it's something we've heard, and we can see how you've done that. You've found that for yourself, and it's been really effective for people to feel like they get to know you, which is probably why so many people are saying they're going to miss you and they're sad that you're leaving town, is because they feel a little bit more connected to you because of that.
I think there is maybe an additional aspect that has to do with the fact that diplomacy is changing.
Hmm.
Diplomacy is changing, but more and more, especially between countries, democratic countries, where you don't have to walk on eggs all the time. It has become much more transactional. It has become, and especially in a country where, Americans don't have time to waste. Americans don't have much time for small talk. So whenever you need to discuss a problem, you speak openly about the problem. You don't package it in the whole like diplomatic talk that one would
Mm.
be used to maybe in other cultures. And there, it really helps to be as sincere, as open about who you are as possible, because people feel they can trust you.
Yeah.
It really helps. So you don't beat around the bush. You go like, if we have something to discuss, we're going to discuss it. But they know you from your appearances on the social media. They know,
Yeah.
and they know this is the real thing. He's not putting up, a mask because now he's the ambassador. They know it's the same guy,
Right.
and I think it does help.
We've been talking a lot about influencing people on the outside, like American public, for example. I want to kind of talk a little bit about influencing on the inside. So you've run a multi-billion-dollar government department, as well as smaller missions, right, that don't have as many staff. How many employees do you have at the embassy, first of all? And how is that different from running a much larger enterprise? Does the way you influence inside the organization change at all? And how important is that?
It is different, and I can also take examples from the military. I spent 30 something years in the Swiss military, and in the Swiss military, you start as a private. So you start as a soldier, you have the experience of being a soldier, and then you do NCO, and then officer, and then company commander, battalion commander in my case. So I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, and of course, the bigger the organization you're dealing with, the more difficult it gets to have a personal contact with everyone. My embassy now is around 70 people. Of course, I know every single one of them. It's fairly easy. Uh, one of my leadership tricks is to wander through the different offices and just to sit down with the people without warning them, and then saying, okay, tell me what's happening. I want to know what are your problems today, and whatever, to create a kind of personal contact. Uh, but I have three leadership lessons that I've applied all over my career. Number one is trust. Number two is trust. Number three is trust. My assumption is when I take over an organization, someone is my trade attaché. He's been through primary school, high school, college, university. He's been trained as a trade attaché. My assumption is he or she is doing her or his job. And I will tend to trust the person and, of course, to control. And then if it doesn't work, then I'll have to correct. But instead of starting by micromanaging everyone because you want to know exactly can she do her job, my assumption is this guy knows what to do. It's a big lesson from the military. When you are heading a mechanized battalion like I have, and you have 52 different specialties in the battalion, from the guy who is repairing the guns to the one who is specialized in communications. How do you think you're going to micromanage all these people? You can't. You can't. You don't even know what they're doing. You know that the result, you know what you're expecting, but you don't know how they do it. So you have to accept that your role is to be giving the impulses, to make the tactical, strategic, whatever decisions, and then to let the people do their job. And this is, for me, this is really the key. And communicating to your staff that you trust them. This is to me the key lesson in leadership. Everyone else, all the tricks that you learn, and every book that you can buy in an airport about all the tricks in leadership, and in 5 years there will be another book saying something slightly different, and it will sell again because everyone wants to be a great leader. Okay, fair enough, but the trick is to accept that at each level, be it NCO, lieutenant, captain, company commander, you'll have to accept that you have a different role.
Yeah.
And the higher you go in the hierarchy, the more you have to trust your subordinates. You have to trust them and let them do their job and stick to what's your job. My job as an ambassador here is 50% communication, 30% strategic decisions. So what do we do? And the rest is, communicating with my superiors in Bern, trying to deliver the best possible analysis. Uh, I have no time to micromanage the work of someone who is the specialized trade attaché for high technology. I just don't have time for it, and this is really my leadership lesson.
That's a good one. I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time. I wanted to ask you, you're going to be passing off your X account, formerly Twitter, because the way that that's set up is it's owned by the ambassador. So as you move on, you're going to be passing it off to a new ambassador. How do you hope that your successor will follow in your shoes online?
One of the great lessons that you learn in the diplomatic service is humility. You're there for a few years, and then there is new blood coming in. And they will do certain things better than you did, and others maybe less optimally. It could be. I have always applied the philosophy that the moment I close the door, I switch the light off, I'm off. I have a successor. I'm not going to call and say, that's how you should do it, because he will probably have different ideas. It's a he. It's a brilliant ambassador to India, and he was the trade attaché here in Washington, so he knows DC very well, and he will do things differently for sure. And maybe different use of the social media, different use of but in the end, that is precisely what organizations like the foreign ministry need. It is the constant renewal of fresh blood. Never to sleep on your laurels. Never to be. On one hand, I would love to be able to stay for another 5 years. And every time you leave a country and you look at in my generation, they used to say your Rolodex, and everyone in Washington D.C. and they go like, it's exactly the wrong time to go. Because now I could display all my qualities and whatever, and at the same time, it's exactly the right time to go, because it's when you may be tempted to turn a little bit complacent. There was a fantastic study in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago about at which stage of their career as CEOs did CEOs reach their best results, and there was a constant. It was usually in the fourth year. The first year, you're just learning. The second year, you start to really building your things. The third year, you're starting to feel comfortable. The fourth year, you're really developing all the things that you now understand really. Like for me, there was a fifth year, but there was COVID, so and then it starts going down, because the moment you are confronted with a new problem, it's not a new problem anymore. You're like, oh yeah, I remember, like 6 years ago, that's how I solved it. So instead of thinking about the problem, you are just taking something out of your trick box. Like, oh yeah, I know how I did it, and you stop thinking. And it seems like the optimal time for CEOs is 4 years. I would not be surprised if for diplomats it would be fairly similar.
That's really interesting. I hadn't seen that one, but I think it makes a lot of sense the way you describe it. And I also think it's interesting you kind of come in knowing that you're leaving. Something that's different, of course, is that those people who have connected with you on your personal Facebook page and they see your bird photos, they can continue to stay in touch with you versus the Rolodex days, right? Where, you move on. And I was going to ask you to close, obviously we've talked about your bird watching and your photography. Is there a bird that you really hope to photograph in Belgium that you haven't captured yet?
So, of course, Belgium being continental Europe, there are quite a few birds that are common with the ones we have in Switzerland. But there is something that Switzerland doesn't have, that's access to the sea. So there are all the shorebirds that I will gladly photograph on the beautiful beaches of Belgium that I will never see in Switzerland, because we don't have access to the sea. So they do quite a lot. As for the ivory-billed woodpecker, I don't know whether in my lifetime we will ever see a picture of the bird. But that would be for the United States. No, the Ivory-billed woodpecker is officially extinct, but not officially extinct. We don't know. We will probably never know, not in my lifetime, whether it's still around. But there are quite a few birds probably in Belgium that I would be very, very happy to photograph. Hoping the light will be good, because they say it's quite cloudy in Belgium, but we'll see.
Well, we wish you luck in your next chapter in Belgium. We're really grateful for everything that you've done in Washington. Again, you just have built such a wonderful reputation, and you've certainly enhanced the Swiss brand, which is your mission as you came here. I think it's been accomplished very well. So many great leadership lessons that you shared with us today, from what Kim Kardashian could learn from you on Instagram to really how you show up as a leader, and trust is the cornerstone of your leadership philosophy. So, Ambassador Pitteloud, I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us. Congratulations on a successful tenure, and we're so pleased to recognize you as a chief influencer.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the honor.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a chief influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.